Sup, you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Deku Had the Powers of inFAMOUS. All he ever wanted was to be a hero. All he ever wanted was to save people. Well, be careful what you wish for Izuku Midoriya, because the universe just might grant it in the worst possible way. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. As the final group left their training building and Kaibara and Kamakiri were hauled away to the nurse's office, All Might had everyone gather at the exit of the mock city, where he congratulated all of them on their first day of training, exclaiming that for their first day they all did exceptionally well and that society would be in good hands with such promising heroes. Everyone was happy for the words of encouragement, much preferring his positive reinforcement over Mr. Aizawa's threats. He didn't stay long, however, saying something about making sure the Kamakiri and Kaibara were okay, and for Izuku and Bakugo to go to the nurse's office, as well to make sure they were healing properly before speeding down the hall like a bullet. Everyone was amazed by the speed of the #1 hero, saying how they wished they could move that fast, all except Izuku, who knew the truth of All Might's limitations. His battle with that mysterious villain, reducing his time as All Might for only an hour a day. As the class began walking down the long corridor, he was held back by Tsu, who gave him a look that told him she wouldn't take no for an answer. Led by the hand to the side of the exit and once out of sight, he was greeted by a hard slap on the top of his hand. "Ow, what was?" he tried to say before Tsuyu pulled him into a kiss, wrapping her arms around his neck and pulling him in closer. His complaints died on his tongue as hers met his as he began to kiss back, both thoroughly enjoying the other after their exhausting battles. "If you ever make me worry like that again, I won't forgive you," she said as they pulled away to breathe, struggling to sound threatening as the happiness of his safety blunted her words. "Didn't mean to scare you," he whispered with a smile. Tsu pouted at that, an expression for easier now with her more human appearance. "Well, you did," she whispered back before her lips turned into a smug smile. "Good job with Bakugo, by the way, that ought to sting his ego, Bakugo," he repeated, surprised by the sudden nickname Tsu had decided to give him. "If he's going to insult you with Deku, I figured we should give him a proper name as well," she answered, sounding very proud of idea. "I think it fits pretty well." Izuku chuckled at the name calling. In all these years, neither he nor Mineta had ever thought to give Katsuki a nickname, not that they would have said in front of him if they had. And sure, he had once affectionately called him Kachan, but those days felt like a lifetime ago. Her shoulders slackening, however, as she eyed his ruined costume. "Shame he messed up your costume. You looked nice in it," she said, blushing slightly. Izuku's face turned red at the compliment, Tsuyu giving a light chuckle at his reaction. They had already gone so much farther than mere compliments, but it seemed there was something more embarrassing about saying it than showing it. "It'll be fine," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "But I have to say, your costume looks nicer." "Thanks, but it's a little tight in the chest now. Seems being part frog slims you down," she smiled as she stepped back to give them both a proper view. Her costume was even greener than his, with a streak of black and yellow running down the sides, though one difference was that hers was a wetsuit that hugged her curves in all the right places. "Definitely," he said, his eyes wandering around her figure before he snapped himself out of it. "Speaking of appearances, how did your family take the new you?" he asked, hopeful that her parents would take the change well and be understanding. But understanding of what he thought to himself, he had not told her or Mineta about Moya and what she had told him about these new powers. How would her parents understand if she didn't fully understand either? And whether he liked it or not, she was part of this, she had been affected by it, and she deserved to know. Tsuyu's smile dimmed as he asked the question, and he mentally kicked himself for his short-sightedness. "Can we talk about that later?" she said, casting her eyes down and away from him as Izuku nodded his head, wordlessly accepting as he took her hand and squeezed it gently. It seemed they both had things to say. Boys' changing room. As Izuku entered the room, he was greeted to the sight of Shoji, the large-bodied heteromorph holding back Kirishima as Sero glared at the blonde Monoma, looking rather pissed off but not enough to be restrained. "What the hell was that?" Kirishima raged, fruitlessly trying to get at the smug blonde. "Yeah, we thought you actually got hurt," Sero added as Monoma looked positively bored with the situation. "If I must educate you, so be it," he sighed, the redhead pulling all the harder against the hold to get at Monoma. We entered that battle under the pretense of heroes and villains for a device that if real could have decimated an entire city. Yet somehow you, under the label of villain, thought it was a good idea to try and help a hero, he explained, looking down his nose at him. It was a training exercise, he argued angrily. And if it hadn't been? If it had been real, would you have been so quick to drop your defenses at the first sign of real pain? We are training for the real world, and as such we must approach our training with all the respect the real world demands. Yet you continue believing that your enemy will adhere to the same arbitrary rules of honor as you. Perhaps you should leave your manliness at the door before you get someone hurt, and we end up with another Mustafa. He finished, not waiting for a reply as he finished changing and walked out the door. Only when the door shut did Shoji release Kirishima, the redhead glaring daggers at the door before huffing back to his locker. Izuku shook his head at the display. While Monoma had been broadly correct in the need for caution, and to take their training seriously, he could have worded it infinitely better. But speaking of blondes with piss-poor communication skills, he looked over to see Bakugo changing as well. The hothead that always had something to say had been eerily quiet after their match, not saying so much as a word. His red fiery eyes had dimmed with every match, especially the match with Ice Guy. And for all the pain he had caused, and for all the joy he got in finally beating him, there was a small part of him that worried over what this change represented. And then there was what Momo had said, her words ringing in his ears and make him sigh in resentful acceptance. She had been right. He had let his emotions get the better of him in their fight. As soon as he touched Bakugo, he could have sent a surge of electricity and take him out. But instead he had tried to beat him down, trying to make him feel the kind of pain he had. And in return he got a face full of fusion, he thought to himself as he raised a hand to the part of his face that he had burned. It had healed by now, but that wasn't the point. He had gotten reckless, and their victory was pure luck. He'd have to be smarter. Looking away from one silent blonde, he was greeted to the sight of another, Kaminari, whose face spoke of something familiar. He could see that he wasn't even there. Physically he was, but mentally he was far away, his body on autopilot as he finished changing. "Hey Kaminari, sorry about your match," but he tried to say, walking up to his fellow electrokinetic. His words seemed to pull him out of whatever world he was in before he looked to him with what he could best describe as a hateful sadness. Midoriya was surprised by the expression he saw, but could kind of understand. He had been taken out pretty quickly, and that had to sting. "If you want, we could train too," he tried to suggest before Kaminari looked as though he was about to break down before closing his locker and storming out of the changing room. "What the hell was that about?" Mineta asked, and Izuku could only cast his eyes down. He had a feeling of where all that emotion had come from, and something told him it would only get worse from here. Girls' changing room. "Oh my god, that was so bad," Gyro sighed, running a hand through her purple hair as she cringed at her loss, with Pony patted her on the shoulder to try and cheer her up. Sue could feel sympathy for her. Her hero team had been the only one that failed to retrieve the bomb. Worse yet by the fact her missing boot was still in the training building, stuck to one of Mineta's hair balls. "I knew I shouldn't have let him do that," she growled, a look of complete exasperation at her teammates' uselessness. "It not too bad, not like Kendo and Setsuna," with Todoroki, Pony encouraged, simultaneously throwing Kendo's team under the bus. "Hey, we tried, he was just too powerful," Kendo defended. "He froze the entire building in seconds. How were we supposed to defeat someone like that? And we had a plan. Juzo was supposed to take him down before he could get to us, but he was with us during the test for recommendation students, and he'd seen what we could do," Setsuna added, subconsciously reaching for the ear that he had frozen and tensing her fist in anger at her loss. "Besides, it not too bad, without Rod his attack work," Pony complimented. And it was true, without the grounding rod they all would have been taking out all at once. But Kaminari had the unfortunate luck of going up against a person who had been training with Izuku for weeks, and a girl that could make just about anything. "Indeed, it seems that short pervert has a brain," Momo said begrudgingly, and Sue her brow furrow at the insult. While she did not like his tendencies, he did not deserve to be insulted like that. "He's not too bad," Ibara defended, surprising Tsuyu with her willingness to defend him. "While he is lecherous within him lays the heart of a hero," she continued, telling them about how he had saved her during the entrance exam. "Yeah, he helped me too," the mushroom girl named Kinoko said. "I was about to get overwhelmed by the robots, and he trapped them all." All the other girls were more than surprised by their testimony. "What about you, Asui?" Momo asked. "You and Midoriya seem to have known him the longest." "He and Midoriya has been friends since they were kids. When the blast happened, Midoriya had gotten injured." Mineta carried him on his back to safety, she told them, relaying the story Midoriya had told him the first day they met. The entire room went silent when they heard that, the mental image of the vigilante that snapped Bakugo's arm being saved by Mineta stunning them. There's more to him than meets the eye, she finished, and was about to leave the room before Mina stopped her. Speaking of that, you look different. And like, not new haircut, different, and with that every eye was on her and she had to suppress the feeling of anger from showing on her face. She had hoped that no one would notice her change. They had only been around each other for only an hour before they left. Enough time that no one should have seen it, but she should have known. She had been the first to meet her in the entrance exam, and she seemed the type to just blurt out what was on her mind. If there was going to be a classmate who would notice her change and call it out in front of everyone, it would be her. Faces plastered with curiosity watched her as she stood silent, her mind reeling from having to come up with an excuse. She'd had a similar conversation before with her family, and that had ended horribly. I was someone that the blast gave another quirk to, she admitted, and it was the truth, and she had told them she had met Izuku in the hospital after the blast, which she thought would make the next part more believable. My frog quirk is a transformation quirk, and it hurts to shift between them. Now that I have a water quirk, I don't want to use my frog quirk unless I really have to, she explained, letting the pain her first quirk had caused her to coat her lie like sunscreen against the rays of her fellow classmates' eyes. It seemed to be working. One by one, the girls' looks of curiosity warped into those of sympathy. It made sense. Even Mina had known her for less than a few hours collectively, and with the wide variance quirks and how they work, they would have no way to know that she was lying. Oh, I'm sorry for bringing it up, Mina quickly apologized, as a look of embarrassment washed over her face for her bluntness. And for a moment Sue felt a pang of guilt in the pit of her stomach for lying. She knew if it was someone else she would have been the first to ask, but even she didn't know. Why had that blast given another quirk, and why had been erasing her original? So many things had changed for her and she had so few answers, and while her classmates might buy her story, she knew Mr. Aizawa and the rest of the school faculty who knew the truth of her frog quirk would want answers. As Izuku left the changing room, he and Bakugo began their walk towards Recover Girl's office, giving Bakugo all the space he wanted as he walked far behind him. Beside him, though, had been Mina and the mushroom girl Kinoko. Hey, nice going with Bakugo, by the way, she whispered, cupping her hand to her mouth so that the blonde couldn't hear. Thank you, he answered back, the taste of victory soured by how he had gotten it. You did great too. I didn't know you were that strong, he praised as Mina smiled smugly, posing dramatically as they walked. They had all watched as she had stopped Kaibara's drill arm with her bare hand, and that hadn't been the only time she had surprised them. In the assessment test, she had been the only one to beat Shoji's grip strength, beating his 540 kg grip with her own 650 kg grip. Even he and Tsuyu hadn't been able to grip harder than 300 kg. Yet like in the ball throw test, you nearly threw it a whole kilometer, Kinoko added, bringing to mind the shocked looks they had all had when she had reeled back her hand and sent that ball flying over the tree line on the other side of the school. To be honest, I didn't know either, she admitted, her earlier confidence wavering as she repeatedly clenched and opened her hand. The strength thing is kind of new, that made Izuku think. Did Mina have the same kind of strange power as him? It seemed possible he didn't think she lived Mustafu before the blast, had the bomb's effects traveled farther than he had assumed. So is that why you're going to Recovery Girl's office? He asked as she nodded her head. It was a split-second thing. I didn't mean to hurt him, she said, sounding truly remorseful. That's why I'm going too, Kinoko told them, chuckling nervously. I got a little too into the role. That's putting it lightly, Mina joked as repeated what she had in the exercise. And though he'd been rather overzealous, he couldn't help but be amazed by her quirk. It was practically the perfect area denial weapon, and he struggled to think how someone could get past it without a window to climb out of. Finally, they reached the nurse's office, and were just in time to see Recovery Girl pulled the last of the mushrooms off of Kamakiri's body. Ah, you finally here. You two boys go over there, and I'll see how you both are faring, she instructed, only giving them a moment's glace before pointing to an X-ray machine as she helped Kamakiri breathe in fresh unspore-filled air. The two boys did as instructed, giving each other a wide berth as Izuku watched Mina and Kinoko apologize to their respective boys. Kaibara had been the more accepting of the apology, shrugging a shoulder as his other arm was hung in a sling. Kamakiri, meanwhile, rebuffed the mushroom girl's apology, saying he didn't need it. As he looked at his scowling face from behind his transparent breathing mask, he couldn't help but draw a parallel to the blonde beside him. It seemed he was returning to his old self. his brow beginning to slant into his usual angry self. After their apologies, Recovery Girl, the girls left, and not long after Kaibara and Kamakiri left as well. After being cleared, now alone with Recovery Girl, she went about making sure they were both okay, examining his upper body for any burns, and making Bakugo take an X-ray for his arm. "You boys' quirks are something else," she mused, shaking her head in bewilderment as she looked at an X-ray of Bakugo's arm that didn't even look like it had ever broken. "You both are as healthy as horses, and your arm seems to have set itself properly," she said to Bakugo as she shooed them both off. In the end, the visit had taken less than 15 minutes. As the two left, Bakugo was quick to leave, so quick he didn't seem to notice the pair empty shoes sitting against the opposing wall. Izuku waited for Bakugo to turn the corner before he began to speak. "Hey Hagakure," he said quietly as the shoes began to shift nervously. "Are you okay?" She remained silent, and the realization that he was standing in front of an invisible naked girl became more and more glaring in his mind as the silence dragged on. "Sorry how I acted back there," she apologized, "and I wanted to say thank you again without the tears." "It's okay," he said almost instantly. What was he supposed to say after having her cry into his shoulder? "It's just no one's ever seen me before. Like the real me," she admitted, sounding both sad and happy at the same time, chuckling anxiously as she continued. "And when you told me you could see me, I thought you were playing some cruel prank on me." As she spoke, Izuku couldn't help but draw a parallel between her and Sue, both girls having quirks that affected them in ways he never had imagined. "And then when I realized you weren't lying, it was all just," she struggled to say, sounding as though she was holding back tears. "It was a lot to take in, I bet it was," he said, as walked up to her and gave her another hug, and while she might have been naked, much more than that she was hurting. "Come on, class has probably already started. Where did you put the rest of your uniform?" he asked as they released each other. "Around the corner," she answered, and as they walked and turned the corner, Toru pushed aside a trash can and retrieved her folded-up uniform. Walking back around, Izuku gave her the privacy to change. It was more symbolic than practical given her quirk, but it seemed right. "Okay, you can come back," she said and turned to see a floating school uniform. "If you'd like, you can hang out with me and my friends," he offered as the two walked back to class and allowed himself one radar pulse to watch her lips turn into a smile as she turned her face to his. "I'd like that." The rest of the day went by smoothly, the classes blurring together as his mind returned again and again to the conversation he knew he had to have. He'd already made up his mind about telling Sue, but he was going to tell Mineta. He might not have gotten another power from that blast, but he had known him almost all his life, and he trusted him with his life. Throwing his bag over his shoulder, he walked over and gathered both Tsuyu and Mineta. "I have something to tell you both," he whispered quietly. "All right, man, shoot," Mineta said, shrugging his shoulders. "Not here, let's go back to my place," he told them, and while Mineta looked at him strangely for a moment, Sue was more than eager, and he could have guessed why. The walk back to his place was quick and quiet, the silence only broken when Tsuyu spoke. "What if your mom's there?" Tsuyu asked. "She usually isn't there around this time," he answered as they finished their journey to Izuku's apartment. As he fiddled with his keys and unlocked the door, he was thankfully greeted by an empty house. Walking into his room and closing the door, he turned to them both. "So what did you want to talk about?" Mineta asked, sitting cross-legged and leaning against his bed. "What I wanted to talk to you both about was the blast," he said as he sat down in his computer chair, needing to sit so he could center himself for what he was about to say. "Okay, but I need you both to promise me that I'm about to say doesn't leave this room," he stated, pointing to each of them. Each nodded their heads, their faces turning more serious with the tone of Midoriya's voice as he slowly explained that after their fight with the Reapers, and after that video of him got popular, Moya came to talk to him. "A person from the HPSC came to talk to you," Mineta shouted, and Izuku did his best to shush him, worrying that somehow someone could still be listening. "What did she want to talk to you about?" Sue asked, fully enthralled by the conversation as he continued his story, telling them about how she had come under the pretense of his vigilante work, and then had asked to speak in private, where she told him about the first suns and the ray sphere. "And it drains neuroelectric energy," he finished as both Tsuyu and Mineta looked at him with slack jaws and wide eyes before Mineta jumped up from his spot with a wide smile. "I knew it. All the stuff I've been saying, every word is true. The government was lying about the blast and are cahoots with a secret organization. The ray sphere, damn, it all makes sense now," he sighed, happy to be vindicated. "But why?" Tsuyu asked. "Why bother creating a bomb that gives people quirks?" "Isn't it obvious?" Mineta said, turning to her. "That ray sphere dishes out ultra quirks to anyone who controls it." "Ultra quirks," Izuku repeated. Come on, man, I thought you were supposed to be the quirk expert, he chastised, putting his hands on his hips, super strength, healing factor, durability, and everything else. Bakugo having his arm snapped and then have it heal in a minute like it was nothing. Look at all that stuff and tell me that's all from a normal quirk, but why didn't you get one? You were closer to Izuku when the bomb went off than I was, Tsuyu countered as she looked down at her now normal hands. And why was it erasing my frog quirk? So that's why you look so different, Mineta exclaimed. It's because they're not quirks, Izuku revealed, and once more both of them were stunned. Izuku then continued on, telling them about Moya sending him into the Neon District and searching for John's dead drops and tailing a Reaper who had a backpack full of blast shards. She said that whatever these powers are, they aren't quirks, he finished, letting the information settle. Dude, you're actually a vigilante super spy, said in awe of what he had done. And now she wants you to help her find her husband with these dead drops, Tsuyu said, repeating what he had told them as he nodded. He's the last one to have the ray sphere, he told her. How do you know that? She asked, and Izuku stumbled. He hadn't told them what had been in the dead drops, and while Mineta knew about his unintentional involvement in the blast, he hadn't told Tsu. Should he tell her? Would she understand? The thought of her looking at him and seeing a murderer sent a chill up his spine. No, she would understand, right? It said so in one of the dead drops, he answered. Really? Let's hear them, Mineta encouraged, and Izuku felt himself cringe internally. Pulling his phone out of his pocket, he flipped to the 3 audio files. He'd only listened to the one, but he guessed now was as good a time as any. With a tap, the silence of the room was filled with the tried, frantic voice of John White. All 3 listening intently as he explained how he retrieved the ray sphere and was going into hiding to get away from Kessler. It was you, Tsuyu said, looking at him with wide eyes. You delivered the bomb? Wait, he didn't know it was a bomb, Mineta said, quickly coming to his friend's defense. I need a moment, she said, looking completely stunned as she rested her head in her hands. Play the next one. The 2 boys looked at each other, and with nothing else to say, they played the next one. Contact established with the first sons. Met a woman who called herself Jane, and she asked me a variety of questions, including whether or not I've exhibited extrasensory abilities. Don't know why she didn't just call it a quirk, but I told her I was quirkless. Jane seemed to mull this over for a while, and then she gave me an address. I was instructed to meet her there at midnight. No further details. As the second message ended, Tsuyu let out a long sigh as she looked at Izuku with eyes almost pleading. Did you know? No, Tsuyu, I didn't, I swear, he swore with every ounce of honesty he had. If I had known what would happen that day, I never would have delivered that package. Come on, Tsuyu, does he look like a terrorist? Mineta said, waving a hand at Midoriya as if the idea was too ridiculous to even take seriously. Do you really think I could do that? He asked, his heart beginning to ache. Deliver a bomb, kill thousands, and all for what? To have powers, to be a hero, he said, disgust building in his throat at the idea his words created. No, I don't, it's just, she tried to say, but her lips were beginning to fail her. Would I risk going to prison by being a vigilante, trying to solve a crime I committed? He said, walking up to her and grabbing her hands in his and feeling the ache in his chest grow deeper at the stiffness of her body. The eyes of the girl that had embraced him feeling so distant. Remember what I said on the day of the entrance exam. Slowly she nodded her head as she spoke, her throat sounding tense and restrictive. You said you wanted to make it all worth it. He felt a small amount of relief in that she remembered. That's why I want to become a hero, to make their deaths mean something and to find every last member of the First Sons and bring them down. Midoriya finally let himself breathe in air after his speech, gulping down breaths as the tension in the room began to lax. You're right, I shouldn't have doubted you, she whispered, squeezing his hands and a look of shame filling her features. It's just a lot to take in, I'm sorry. Midoriya felt the pain in his chest slowly begin to settle down as the trio stayed in silence for a moment, the reveal leaving both him and Tsu emotionally exhausted. All right, you two, let's finish this. Play that 3rd recording so we can hear what's next, Mineta suggested. Pulling apart, Midoriya sat back on his chair and thumbed through his phone and played the last dead drop. 10-day communication delay due to being incapacitated. Met Jane outside an abandoned warehouse. She put a black bag over my head and led me in, counted 2,000 steps and 1 right hand turn. She sat me in a chair, strapped down my arms and legs and left me there. Abandoned warehouse, he must have been in the Warrens, Tsuyu said as her voice grew distant at the mention of that place. The Warren is huge though, Mineta added, shaking his head. You could spend months combing that place and without knowing which warehouse they met. That was a problem. As of now, the only lead to John was whatever place he had been taken to and Jane, which was more than likely an alias for her real name. "I'll call Moya later, see if she can help," he said. "And when you do that, you call me. I'm not about to let you do this on your own," Mineta told him. "You can count me in too," Tsuyu added. "These villains need to be stopped, and if the pros can't do it, then we have to. No, this way too dangerous," he interjected, trying to stop this train of thought before it left the station. "Which is why I'm coming," he said with a smile even as his face looked nervous. "Someone needs to watch your back while you're out playing super spy." Midoriya rubbed his temples with his fingers. This was the last thing he wanted, but the genie was thoroughly out of the bottle now, and neither of them were going to take no for answer. "God damn it, fine. But the moment any fighting starts, we run, okay? And we don't use our powers unless absolutely necessary," he surrendered. "Great, I'll go home and start looking through the Warren on the internet. See if I can find a place that looks more suspicious than usual," he announced, and was about to leave when Tsuyu spoke up suddenly. "If we're going to do this, we should probably get some new clothes," Tsuyu advised, to which Mineta looked at her in confusion. "We can't exactly go around in our hero costumes, and we need something to hide our identities," she clarified, and both boys thought it was a good idea. It seemed they were going shopping after all. UA. Aizawa sat with his fellow teachers as they went over the recordings of the students' mock battles. He had to admit he was impressed with most of their performances, so many ready and able to use their quirks to the best of their abilities and being able to adapt on the fly. Usually most needed to get that trained into them. A lifetime of never being allowed to truly experiment, with their quirks leaving their ideas for application hamstrung. But among that shining review was a black spot that he had known since the beginning he would have to remove. "I say we expel Katsuki Bakugo," he told them all, paying little mind to his colleagues' looks. "Come now, Aizawa, don't you think you're being a little rash?" All Might said, now in his skinny, disheveled form. "No, I warned him already. If he injures someone too severely, he's out," he said simply. "Come on, Shoto, you're overreacting," Present Mike added, giving his friend a look that made his annoyance increase. "I mean, both those kids walked off that fight without a scratch." "Indeed, their healing abilities are quite interesting," said the baritone voice of Ectoplasm. "He'll live if he dodges," Aizawa retorted, not allowing for a shift in topic as he used the boy's words against him. "And what happens when he faces off against someone who can't just walk it off? He has potential and a strong quirk. But all that means nothing if he can't control himself," Snipe added, and surprising Aizawa slightly. "If he can't do that, he's just a time bomb waiting to go off." "Still though, it seems too much for a first offense," Cementos defended. "Perhaps a suspension or simply stopping him from going to the USJ. Don't you think we should get her opinion on this?" Present Mike said, as eyes turned to the astronaut suit of 13. "She would be the one having to help teach him. I think it would be a little harsh. I mean, we should at least see how he acts in an environment where it's necessary to save and not hurt," she told them. "An excellent point," Nezu complimented. "If you are worried about how he will handle others, the USJ would be a perfect place to see if you are correct. And if I am proven right?" Aizawa asked, already knowing the answer. "Then you can expel him," Nezu answered. "Also, I would like to keep him around as well," Recovery Girl chimed in, brow furrowed and hand on her chin in deep thought. "These kids' abilities are unlike anything I've ever seen." "What do you mean by that?" asked Nezu, and if Aizawa was feeling paranoid, he could almost hear anxiousness in the mouse's voice. "I have been healing people for longer than most of you have been alive, and in that time I have never seen quirks like the ones granted by that blast," she told them, sounding grave. "That boy should have had a shattered radius and ulna, and the other had the beginning signs of third-degree burns over most of his body. My quirk could have healed them but would have left them exhausted," she continued, taking in a breath and looking at All Might. "But they healed themselves in a fraction of the time. Soft tissue healed in seconds and broken bones in minutes, and without even a hint of exhaustion that level of healing should have had on them." "What are you trying to say?" Midnight asked, speaking up for the first time since the meeting began. "These are not simply the abilities of a single extra quirk. Then what do they have?" Present Mike asked, his usual smile falling to the wayside. "I have not the faintest idea, and that is why I want them close at hand. Everyone knows the police have run out of ideas and suspects that could have been involved in that explosion, but maybe we can at least figure out what exactly they were trying to accomplish." She finished finally, taking a breath after her long explanation. Aizawa had to admit she was right, at least in the fact that the Mustafu terrorist attack had gone completely cold. No witnesses, no suspects, and all the evidence was currently attending his class, and if they were ever going to catch the bastards, they needed to rethink their approach and start again. Takoba Beach, it was such a different sight now. Children played and splashed in the crystal blue water and laughed with the innocence of youth whilst parents bathed in the sun on soft sand. So picturesque it could have been vacation card. Nice to see our work being appreciated, Mineta mused as the warmth of the sun washed over them. There was not even a hint of the disgusting dump that had once plagued this place, and shame we can't tell them it was us. The reward is seeing them enjoying themselves, Midoriya said with a smile as a group of kids ran past them to an ice cream truck. Could you not be a paragon for 5 minutes and let me be selfish, please? Mineta groaned. But even as his lips pulled into a smile, it slowly died as he looked back at the happy children. He couldn't help but feel a sense of wrongness about all of this, a wrongness that stabbed at his mind as it struggled between what he was seeing and what he had seen. Here and no, unless you were told, you never would guess that less than a 2 hours walk from where he was standing were alleys of dying druggies and homeless people, their quirks seemingly run amok by the effects of the blast. It all seemed too normal, as if nothing was wrong. Excuse me, came a timid voice from behind as they all turned around to see a short brunette-haired girl with green eyes looked at them nervously, clutching a clipboard in her hands. I couldn't help but notice, but are you 3 from UA? She asked them, and all looked to realize they were still wearing their school uniforms. Yes, we are, Midoriya answered, and he watched as the girl's eyes lit up like twin firecrackers, her initial shy attitude evaporating. Oh, that's great, and wait, you're the vigilante, she beamed as those within earshot looked in their direction at the mention of the word vigilante. They were to try and hush her, not wanting the attention as she bashfully covered her mouth with her clipboard. I'm sorry, she said with a smile. I was just hoping you would be interested in donating blood. They all looked confused before she pointed to a pitched tent on the boardwalk with a big red cross on it. I'm sure you all know about that awful villain attack. Well, all those injured people needed a lot of blood, and we quickly ran through our reserves. So I'm out here to see if I can find anyone willing to help bring our levels back up, she told them. Izuku felt his earlier misgivings lighten. At least someone was doing something to respond to the effects of the blast. We have time, right? He both said, asked to both Mineta and Sue, who each agreed. It shouldn't take too long, and where they were going was practically around the corner. Great, follow me, she said, leading them down the boardwalk with slight skip in her step. She seems a little too enthusiastic, don't you think? Sue said quietly to Izuku. Maybe, but who knows, we might be the first people today to accept, he told her, shrugging his shoulders as they finally reached the tent. With a quick swipe of Miko's hand, the tent flap opened, and inside was simple chairs that wouldn't have looked out of place in a doctor's waiting room, along with empty IV bags, which played Izuku's idea of them being the first. Just sit over there and I'll get everything ready, she told them, walking over to a rolling cabinet and began inspecting the needles, looking at them with the same discerning eye as a painter would his brushes. You might need stronger needles, Izuku told her, the reality of his strange powers coming to mind as he remembered his encounter with a Reaper's shotgun. Our skin is kind of tough. The young girl gave a sly smile as the three sat down. I'm sure it must be, to have survived as you did. It must have been very painful. I wouldn't do it again if I could, he told her as she giggled, and Midoriya saw Tsuyu side-eyeing the girl. Ah, we never got your name, he said, hoping to redirect the conversation. Oh, I'm Miko Agio, what's yours, she told him as the three introduced themselves as well. Izuku was about to ask something else before Miko began to talk again. Still though, I thought you were very brave, Izuku, she continued on, saying his name almost as if she was tasting it and either not noticing or caring about the pair of eyes glaring into her as she inspected his arm, fingers tracing his forearm as they looked for a proper vein. Getting shot at, explosions, and getting hit by those nasty tendrils, she listed off, tapping his forearm with every example she listed off. You certainly know how to take a hit. What does this have to do with anything? Tsuyu interjected as a flash of annoyance spread across the girl's face before she returned to her wide smile. Sorry, sometimes I get a little too excited, she admitted as she got to work, whipping down the area with rubbing alcohol before pressing a needle designed to help pierce quirk-enhanced skin into Izuku's arm with practiced ease. Izuku felt a light twinge of pain and a small amount of surprise as he watched how quickly his blood came out. The girl then went on to do the same to both Mineta and Sue, the two girls giving each other a look that only girls could fully decipher. It had taken far less time than he thought it would, as by the 5-minute mark each had filled their bags. Thank you both again, and I promise this will be used to do great things, she told them as they left, and it didn't take long before Tsuyu came close and spoke to him. I don't like the way she was looking at you, she whispered to him, wrapping her hand in his with fingers interlocked. I think a blind man could have figured that out, Mineta said with a chuckle as Tsu glared at him. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for a good cat fight, but give me a 10-second heads up so I can start recording. Tsuyu didn't give his words the validity of a response, only squeezing Midoriya's hand lightly as he gave Minato a look that said knock it off. Minato was quick to do so, raising his hands in surrender as the trio began to walk to their original destination. It is strange though, being here again, Tsuyu said as they walked past the beach down the familiar street that had started their road to heroism. Even now, looking carefully, he could see the bullets holes high on the building's wall that the Reapers had created. He could still see stray pieces of concrete that had been kicked to the side from the explosions of grenades. It truly was strange, but this was the place he wanted to go as they came into view of a familiar dingy pawn shop. Pushing open the door, the bell dinging loudly as its owner looked up from a magazine. Midoriya, Haruki gasped as he walked around the cashier desk and came up to them. "How have you been?" "I've been okay, sir," he said, rubbing the back of his head bashfully by his enthusiastic reaction. "Oh, don't sir," me slapping his hand on his shoulder. "So you're finally taking me up my offer to help your friends." Mineta and Tsu kept silent under the gaze of the large man, put off by his immediate and over-friendly demeanor. "Yes, Haruki, we were hoping we could look around for some clothes," he told him as Haruki released his hand from his shoulder and told them to take a look around and to take all the time they need. The place had been just as stacked with random odds and ends as last time, if not more, as they all began to look through the aisles, Midoriya helping to try and find something to their liking. Tsuyu seemed drawn to deep purple hoodie and a pair of oddly shaped silver gloves. She asked what they were, and Haruki was quick to explain that they were a support item he had gotten recently. Apparently more and more former heroes were coming here to pawn off their support gear. He then went a long explanation on how he'd given the former hero a fair price for the gloves, but Midoriya was more concerned with the apparently high number of heroes throwing in the towel. It seemed the blast had left a more permanent mark than he had thought. Mr. Haruki, do you think you have anything in my size?" he sighed, pointing to his rather small frame. Haruki rubbed his chin and laughed. "Yeah, I think I might have something in your size. Something that isn't too embarrassing. Come with me." As Izuku watched Mineta and Haruki go into the back, he grinned at the idea of his friend coming back in a goofy outfit before he noticed that Tsuyu had stopping dead in her tracks, her hands shaking even as she clenched them into fists. "Tsuyu, are you all right?" he asked, worry deep in his voice as he looked at her face and saw that she was taking short and fast breaths, eyes wide as turned to look at where she was staring and saw a small shirt made for child with a cartoon frog on the front. I'm sorry," she scrambled to say before she turned away, practically running out of the store. Izuku was quick to chase after her, following her around the side of the store where she leaned against wall. "What's the matter?" Midoriya tried to ask, nervousness drenching high voice as Tsuyu's breathing grew more and more shallow until all at once she roared in anger and slammed her fist into a dumpster, the steel buckling and caving in around her fist with a deafening clang. Izuku watched in stunned silence as tears began to flow down her face, as she took her other hand, wrenched herself free before walking to the other side of the alley as she pressed her back to the wall and slid down. Izuku slowly walked to her side, nervous to her reaction. He had never seen her like this. For all the time he had known her, she was always the one to keep control of her emotions, or at least that was she was when they first met. Silently he slid down next to her and heard her quiet sobs, hand covering her eyes as he laid a hand on her shoulder, her body shivering at the touch as she took a deep shaky breath. "Tsuyu, what's wrong?" he asked her again as she remained silent. "Tsuyu, please talk to me," he pleaded, desperation in his voice as she slowly peeled her hands away and saw her eyes red and puffy, face stained with tears and lisp quivering as she looked at him. It was the way she tried to say, fumbling over her own words. "Tsuyu, what happened that morning?" As Tsuyu watched Midoriya turn the corner, his words having left a warmth in her chest after the moment they had shared. This moment was however cut short by the sound of the door to her parents' room squeak open. Turning to her door, she stood frozen like a deer in headlights as she heard the sound of her mother walking past her door, and to the bathroom cooled her confidence for the future, feeling like a flame that had just been dosed by a bucket of water as she looked down at her hands once more. Her perfectly normal hands. "Oh shit," she whispered to herself, pacing back and forth as she ran her fingers through her hair, looking around at nothing in particular as she came to the realization that she would have to explain her sudden and extreme transformation. "How the fuck am I going to explain this?" she said through her teeth, anxiousness and dread drowning her as she tried to think of a way to explain this. But how the hell was she going to explain when she barely knew how any of this worked? But she had time. It was usually half an hour before they told her to get up to make breakfast for Satsuki and Samadare. She had time. Sitting down slowly on her bed, trying to make the creaking of the bed springs as silent as possible, her mind raced through ways she could explain this. Could she just play it off? She was already going through changes because of the blast. But it hadn't been this drastic, she hissed in frustration. They might not have noticed her standing straighter than usual, but this was an entirely different ballpark. Second puberty, she thought before cringing at the idea. As more and more ideas came and went, each one becoming more and more ludicrous as she came to terrible certainty that there was no way out of this. Maybe they wouldn't care, she tried to say to herself, the last-ditch idea springing forth. It wasn't as if they cared much about her new quirk, so maybe they wouldn't care about its effects on her either. She hated how much the first half of that statement was true. As time went by and she heard the sound of her parents getting ready, she could help but feel more and more like a mouse about to be fed to a snake with only her door separating their cages. And it was only a matter of time that cage opened. And that time was now. "Tsuyu, get up," her mother said from the other side of the door, tapping loudly on her door. A part of her wanted to just jump out of the window like Midoriya had, then face was coming, but that would only delay and probably make it worse somehow. "Okay, Mom, I'm getting up," she eventually said, doing her best to sound like she just got up. Hearing her mother walk away, Tsuyu took a deep breath as she tried to steady her mind. Let her mask of stoicism fall over her features. "The truth cannot hurt you, the truth cannot be used against you," she repeated to herself like a mantra before she got up and grasped the doorknob tightly. Turning the knob, here's the springs stretch as light began to spill in through the growing crack. She walked out into the hallway. Feeling like a prisoner on their last walk to the chair, she turned into the living room where her father was watching the news and not even noticing she was there. That was before the sound of someone gasping pierced the relative quiet. Turning her head, she saw her mother, her eyes bulging even wider than they normally did, and her hand over her large mouth. "Tsuyu," she whispered, a shock in her voice as she no doubt questioned if she was really seeing what was in front of her. It was only then did her father look over, his face contorting into a scowl at the sound before his eyes too went wide as they beheld their daughter. "What the fuck?" he said before Tsuyu could even get a word out, getting up off the sofa as his face returned to that oh-so-familiar scowl. "Hello, Mom, Dad. I'm sure you must have questions," she said, trying to sound as calm as possible. "Damn right I do, Asui," he said, croaking in anger as Tsuyu did her best to explain with what little knowledge she had, telling them that after the blast she had begun to change, her frog quirk slowly fading away with time and the presence of the blast shards. But in doing so, she also had to admit that she had been going out training with Mineta and Izuku. And as she did, she could only see her father grow angrier and angrier by the word. "Midoriya," he hissed as he walked closer while her mother was to bust, still trying to process all of this. That stunned her, so much so it nearly knocked the stoic mask right off her face. He was more upset about that than what was an unknown substance that was literally changing her from the inside out. "Goes gallivanting off with some boy and leaving her siblings all alone," he hissed under his breath as he swiped his phone off the table. It took all her strength to not anything after that. Who was he, who was either of them, to talk about her siblings? She was more their mother than either of them. Who was the one made their breakfast and packed their lunches for school? Her. Who was the one stayed up with them when they had nightmares? Her. Who was the one who took care of them when they were sick? Her. Who was the one who sacrificed even the chance of a social life because they couldn't be fucked to take care of their very children they created? Her. "Dear, maybe you're shut up," her mother tried to say before she folded like a lawn chair under the assault of her father's words. "He was in our home, he gave you those things," he roared. "What are you doing?" she asked, anxiousness and anger seeping into her words. "I'm calling the school, I'm going to get that boy expelled," he fumed, getting angrier and angrier as he fumbled with the buttons. "No," she said, raising her voice. She couldn't let Izuku get in trouble because of her. "Please, Daddy did nothing wrong." Her father's head whipped around in a flash, storming up to her and pointing a finger in her face. "Nothing wrong, look at you. Look at what he's done," he roared as the cracks in her mask began to widen as her father insulted Izuku. "And you tried to defend him, not the least bit upset by him destroying your quirk," he said, roaring in her face as he returned to trying to call the school. Her blood was boiling now. "Destroy my quirk? He didn't destroy a thing," she growled inside her mind. He had the first person in her life that she could be herself around, and now he was going to take that from her too. "Good," she hissed, not even realizing she had said it before the words left her mouth. "What?" he said, eyes flaring with a dangerous intent. "What did you say?" Tsuyu could feel the fear crawl up her spine, a lifetime of placating trying to force her back into being a scared little girl. But Midoriya had seen her, had believed and trusted him as she did him. and his words gave her the fire in her soul necessary to say the words she had always wanted to say. He did nothing wrong, I never asked to be a heteromorph, she finally said, a lifetime of bottled emotion rushing out all at once. And like you said, a heteromorph could never be real hero. You should be happy, she mocked, the ghost of a smile painted across her face before the stinging pain of a hand slapped across her face. Shut your fucking mouth, you ungrateful little shit, he swore. Tsuyu was stunned for a moment. In all her life he had never struck her. Oh sure, he had shouted barbed insult and backhanded compliments, screamed in her face innumerable times, but this was a first. A part of her wanted to cry, the last proof and final nail in the coffin to show that he never had any love for her. But another, swiftly growing part of her was something beyond furious as a seed of vindictive malice planted itself in her soul. What do I have to be grateful for? You've never given me anything, she hissed. All her life she had never been enough. If she ever succeeded in anything, her father had always been there to tell her it meant nothing, and any failure made it worse. It was why she had always been as stoic, unemotional. A mask carefully crafted over the years to protect her from him, always telling the truth because it was the one thing he could not take from her. Her mother was crying now, grating like nails on a chalkboard against Sue's ears. But amongst all that useless noise were no calls for her father to stop, no running up to try and put herself between her and her father. She was just as pathetic, a pathetic mother, a pathetic person, and the only thing that brought her even a step above her father was that she at least allowed her to dream and had done what she did to make her dream real. If it wasn't for me, we would still be living in the Warrens. You wouldn't even have the luxury of complaining about a broken window, he spat, as though the bare minimum was any to write home about, and it was the money from my pocket that allowed you to lie to yourself and believe you could be anything at all. Is that what you think? Sue smiled. A thin, malicious thing as she turned her head and glared a single eye at her mother. Do you want to tell him, or should I? Was her father really that stupid? He worked a low-end salary job, the greatest height a useless heteromorph could hope for, and he thought that kind of salary was enough to get her into the most prestigious school in Japan. Oh, there were more pockets than your own, and so many hands and happy endings. He looked at her in confusion, brow still furrowed as the gears in his head spin like a car stuck in the mud. He was that stupid. Funny thing about taking care of kids, you tend to stay up late and see so many things, she said, and oh, she had. Like she had told Izuku freaks and fetishes, and when her mother would come home some nights smelling of bad cologne and sweat, heading straight to the bathroom without saying a word. It didn't take long for her to put two and two together. It was only then did her father begin to piece together what she was saying, and the look of sheer disgust and anger she beheld was nearly demonic. She watched, almost in slow motion, as her father reeled back his hand again, and in that fraction of a second, she felt as if she might have gone too far, admitted to much. And in that mere fraction of a second, she had a choice to make. She could let it land. The effects of the blast had made her far tougher than she had even been, and she could take it. Take it and hope that it would be enough to sate his ego. Or she could grab him by the wrist and squeeze, to make him feel the powerlessness he had forced her to feel. With that, the choice was clear. She squashed that feeling of fear, and as her father swung his arm forward, she snapped her hand up like a cobra and snatched his wrist, stopping it dead in its tracks and almost making her father fall over himself from the momentum. His look of shock of halted attack turned quickly to that of pain as Tsuyu began to squeeze. She could feel the bones bend beneath her fingers as her cried out in pain. You are not going to call the school. You are not going to do anything, she told him, looking down at him with complete disgust as he fruitlessly tried to peel her fingers back. She should have done this years ago. Tsuyu, let him go, came the voice of her mother as she came up to her, a look of fear in her eyes. Tsuyu, please, pleading, she was pleading for this man. After all he had done, after everything he'd said. Sue, why are you hurting Daddy? The voice cut through her rage like a hot knife through butter as she turned her eyes back to the hallway and saw Samidare and Satsuki staring at her sister looking at her with tears in her eyes. She was holding her teddy bear tightly and was wearing a shirt with a cartoon frog on it. Immediately she released her father, him crumpling to the ground as he clutched at his wrist in pain. Satsuki, it isn't, she tried to say, walking closer with fear in her voice. Tsuyu's heart then felt like it had been stabbed with ice, dropping down into her stomach as she retreated away from her, Samidare stepping up to protect her. Protect her from me? Tsuyu's lips were quivering now, the euphoric victory over her father turning to ash in her mouth. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Get out, she heard a voice say as turned one last time to see father looking at her with that exact same look of fear. Get out of my house, present. I ran to my room, took my school clothes and jumped out the window. I ended up changing in the washroom of a gas station, she said, finishing her story as more tears fell from her eyes. Midoriya sat in stunned silence at everything he had heard. At first he had felt a deep, burning rage when she had told him what her father had done to her. But as the story finished, the rage was accompanied by a deep sense of guilt that threatened to drown him. If he had never gone to her house, if he had never given her those blast shards, then none of this would have happened. Even the thought of her father making good on his threat to try and get him expelled played a distant second in the worry he had for Tsuyu. She had been suffering in silence and he didn't even know. "I'm so sorry," he told her. "The way they looked at me, they thought I was a monster," she sobbed, shivering as she struggled to breath. "No, Tsuyu, they're just too young to understand," he said, trying to console her, but it seemed he'd chosen the wrong words. "And now I've left them all alone," she cried out, flaring with anger before crashing back down as she stared up into the sky. "Who's going to read them bedtime stories? Should we call the police?" "No," he tried to suggest before Tsuyu cut him off. "No police. If I told them, they would take them away and put them in foster care, and I might never see them again," she explained. "I just don't know what to do." The two sat there in silence, both unsure of what to do or if there even was anything to do. "Do you think he's going to try and pull you out of school?" he asked her as she flatly shrugged her shoulders. "Maybe. The first year is already paid off, but I don't know. And now I have nowhere to go." "Well, you can stay at my place," he told her. It wasn't much, but at least something he could do. "Would your mother let you?" she asked, looking at him through red, puffy eyes. "She'll definitely want to have a conversation afterwards, but yeah," he answered. His mother was a good person, and after hearing Tsu's story, he was even more grateful for it. It wouldn't take much to convince her. "Come on," he said, picking himself up and offering her a hand. "It is what it is now, and we can try and figure out what to do tomorrow." Tsuyu looked at his before slowly nodding her head and took his hand. "Let's grab Mineta, buy our stuff and go home." "Okay, and Izuku, thank you," she said, looking at the ground. "You're welcome." Later that day, Miko Agio sat on the pier, legs swinging over the edge as she watched the sunset with a wistful expression. It was late in the evening now, the last of the loving couples having left, the last of the sun finally falling over the horizon. If any were still around, they would have seen identical twins. As Miko lovingly, she took another sip of her drink and looked over to the girl next to her, smiling warmly. "You know, I was beginning to think that I would never get to meet him," she admitted. After she had seen that video of that boy fighting those villains, looking all bruised and battered, she knew she had to meet him. And now she had a name to put to the face. "Izuku Midoriya," she hummed, the name like honey on her tongue. She was about to take another sip before she stopped herself, putting her hand over the opening to physically stop herself. This was from him, and though it was best-tasting blood she had ever drank, that just meant it was something to savor, not gulp down. Looking over the real Miko, her skin ghostly pale and blank eyes staring at nothing, she couldn't help but thank her. After all, it was her form and position that allowed her to even meet him. Plus her small size had made it easier for her to hide. Who knew that a body could fit so easily in a cabinet if you fold them the right way? "Thank you for everything, but I think it's time we separate," she said, laying her hand on the backpack between them. With a push, the cinder block inside the bag fell into the ocean, pulling the drained girl along with it, as the splash they made was quickly enveloped by the waves. Getting up and letting herself stretch, her body began to be covered in blood, it emerging from every pore in her body, coating the girl that had pretended to be Miko and revealing Himiko Toga, the blood congealing and flaking off like dead skin. And as the street lights began to flicker on, if anyone were close, they could see a girl skipping down the street, laughing and singing of a newly found love. "Izu, Izu, give me your answer, do. I'm half crazy, all for the love of you. It won't be a stylish marriage, I can afford a carriage, but you'll sweet upon the seat of a bicycle built for two." Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious.